We've been thinking a lot about courage this week and about compliance and about really at some level this just little excerpt from Catch-22, which you had remembered and I found in our book here, was prompted by our talking about how so many of the renditions of the resistors, those who do not comply, those who say, no, I'm not going along, the life that is portrayed of them tends to be one of darkness and paucity, and
it's one of austerity,
and sort of, the image that comes to mind. It's sort of like a grayscale, liquid of unknown provenance dripping from ducts onto you. You can't ever quite get warm or dry. There are very few comforts. It's a dreary, dark choice. But, if you're that kind of person, then you go. And we wanted to talk about the other way to view this.
Right. And in fact, the reality. So there's, of course, a great deal of effort invested in spooking people into imagining that if they say what they see, then terrible things will befall them. And that, that keeps a lot of people in line.
Yeah.
And it's
you don't want rats crawling over your toes while you sleep, do you?
No, I don't think so.
But I mean, that's the sort of thing that's the imagery, right? Like, okay, you step out of line and before you know it, that's the kind of life you're going to be having.
Right. And indeed, in the current environment, I should point out that when you say resistors, there is this hashtag resistance thing that I don't want any part of.
Oh, I don't even know that.
Well, it's a throwback to the election, and in fact, the 2016 election. But the idea is it's a branded kind of resistance rather than people who are actually resisting the orthodoxy. In fact, it's become a kind of orthodoxy. But nonetheless, there is this interesting phenomenon where if you actually do first principles thinking, you call it like you see it, and you do so publicly, things do happen, right? And not all of them are good, to be sure. And we have lost quite a number of friends in recent times over calling it like we see it with respect to issues related to the pandemic.
Guess what else, though?
The other thing, though, what they don't manage to convey is that this causes a kind of upgrade in your social life, because the people who, publicly chastise you in such circumstances are actually not high quality. They may seem like it under normal circumstances, but when the chips are down, they won't be there. And that's actually a very important thing to know. We learned this at Evergreen, too.
Right. But let's just be very clear. And I know, the viewers who are longtime viewers who are coming here because they find something of value will not have made this error. But I could hear what you just said as suggesting that if you get critiqued, that person isn't doing you a solid and isn't worth having around.
No. A great friend will critique you. They will do it carefully. But there's this public distancing thing that is of a very different sort. And we saw this at Evergreen. And of course, the first time we learned this lesson when this happened at Evergreen, there were lots of people who we had thought were our friends who turned out not to be up to the challenge. But a great many people emerged. And the point was the trade was very positive, right? The upgrade in the quality of people that surrounded us was amazing. Now,
what we would say at the time, in fact, was that there were surprises in both directions. And we've begun asking some of our new friends, some of the people whom we are coming into contact with, okay, when you spoke up, when you became public on whatever topic it is that you are now persona non grata in your former social circles, did you find, what did you find? We try not to lead the witness. We try not to tell people what it is that we already think we know. And what people say over and over again is it is a reaffirmation of what we ourselves found, which is that there are surprises in both directions, meaning that some of the people who we thought would be loyal as friends, even if they didn't agree with the conclusions, were not, were cowardly, were disloyal, did not act as friends. And some people with whom we actually didn't know that we had any affinity or affiliation at all stood up and acted courageously and boldly because they too could not bear to observe an injustice or authoritarianism flying under the banner of anti-racism or science or whatever it is, right?
So I guess what I would say is, you could simply count heads, right? And frankly, I don't know what the net is. Our social circle grew a lot after Evergreen. That's not necessarily what's taken place in modern times. But the point is, if you do so waiting for quality, then what you find is that actually you discover incredibly interesting, dynamic people who are excellent at careful thought, right? And so anyway, there is this kind of upgrade phenomenon that is not famous. People do not know that, that this is part of the equation. And so
there is a question. I mean, we do hear from people, and I think this is justified. Okay, but you guys, us, we're findable. And indeed, so many people reach out to us that we aren't able to respond to most people who do. And so I'm sure, we miss lots of people who are amazing, who reach out to us, who we just never follow through with because we don't have
too many.
Yeah. We don't have the time for it. We don't have that, time is finite. But for those of you who don't have a way, like how do people find one another? And I guess that's, what we were trying to say is being courageous is not inherently going to bring you a life in which rats are running over your toes in your sleep. But how is it that people find the community of other people like them who are not seeing the world the way they're being told to see it?
Well, I think what my impression after Evergreen was, I wish, if there were to be, a minute of supernatural stuff, right? And you could pick what the supernatural thing was, the ability to know who actually had the characteristics that would render them strong in adverse circumstances, and who seemed like they might be that person but was destined to disappoint. This is the most important piece of information you could have, right? You do not want to discover, once you're in the foxhole, that the person who talked a good game actually has no courage and will sell you out, right? You don't want that. You want to know ahead of time who really has the depth of character, so that what you encounter on the surface is actually indicative of what's below. And you don't know that until a severe challenge. And so, in essence, there is no substitute for the high pressure test of the system. So I guess my point is, I believe that anybody who stands up will discover this. They will find out that many around them who they think are, and who are more than decent under normal circumstances, will fail the test under dire circumstances.
Well, so two things. I hope I remember both of them here. We have found, when we are anonymous in the world as we're moving about, and increasingly that's not necessarily the case. And frankly, I mourn the loss of anonymity, because for me as an animal behaviorist, a lot of what I learn about people is by going out into the world and not just observing, but interacting with them as just, a human being who doesn't already have stated opinions in the world. We get recognized and approached, and it's lovely. We've yet to be approached by anyone with whom it wasn't lovely, but I always feel a sort of sense of like, that means that I can't be learning in the way that I would be learning from here, because I don't know to what degree this is a show, right? But when we have, both you and I do this in somewhat different ways, and largely in overlapping but somewhat non-overlapping, like retail venues, ask people, just show any little indicator of not being totally on board with whatever the dominant paradigm is right now. And this, in summer of 2020 here in Portland, it was largely about the responses to the protesters that became rioters every night. And it was about the, shutting down police. And it was about Black Lives Matter. And increasingly it's about, lockdowns and outdoor masks and vaccine mandates. And it is amazing how many people seem not only willing, but eager to take the smallest hint that maybe you are not an automaton, that maybe you haven't swallowed the dominant thing, hook, line, and sinker, and will then just talk. We'll talk, and sometimes a little bit, but sometimes it seems like they go on for hours about what it is they're actually seeing and what they think it means, and how bad the public policy and the uniform public response seems to be.
Yeah, actually, I'm sure that this has been understood by those who have analyzed authoritarianism.
Yeah.
But one of the hallmarks has to be when you coerce a population into compliance, the pressure on individuals is immense, and the desire for those individuals to find somebody that they can actually be safe in talking about what they don't like about it. In other words, there's a danger in confessing, yeah, actually, I'm not on board with this, right? Even if I'm complying, it's not because I think this is a good idea. Right. But people will not in general be public about this because the hazard of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person is too great. So if you put out a little bit of a bat signal. Yes, I do have a cat who's crawled into my lap here. If you put out a little bit of a bat signal, right? And I mean, in fact, this is where we are, I would say, on masks, right? Mm-hmm. The mask thing has clearly become about compliance. And I will say for the 1000th time, we were extremely early on the idea of masks, and the failure of the evidence to...
It seemed obvious. We were compelled... that it seemed obvious, and that the U.S. Surgeon General and the WHO and Fauci and everyone else was like, "Don't wear masks. That would be foolish." And then they came out with like, "No, actually, that was to preserve the PPE for the healthcare workers." That seemed obvious to us, and I think we were wrong.
Right. I think we were wrong. I think there is a small amount of good. It's not enough to justify mandates. It requires A, certain kinds of masks. B, it requires that they be worn in very particular ways. And the point is, it's just not justified. But it's been a marvelous policy from the point of view of discovering who will...
Will they agree to this?
Right. Who will go along with mandates that make no sense. And it's been just, really picture perfect with respect to taking the message, be frightened, and transporting it everywhere. It rides around with every citizen who has to put on a mask or walk around with it. We get these reminders constantly, there's a pandemic. These people are a danger to you, right? And now the thing is... the
unmasked, the unvaccinated, the uns are dirty and dangerous.
Yeah.
And perhaps evil.
Right. Now, you and I are compliant mask-wise. We don't fail to put them on. We
live in a state and a city, a state, and a coast that is largely masked.
Right. So we put them on. We're not flaunting...
Inside retail establishments, except when we're eating.
Well, no. Hold on. We are compliant with the requirement to wear a mask. The harm, while there, is small enough that we're not going to ignore the rule. However, there is no rule that says you have to play along with the idea that this makes sense, right? And so when one sits down at the table and takes off their mask in a restaurant as if they're, as if this is like smoke, that if you get below it, you can breathe again. One is perfectly free to evidence, yes, I'm complying, but I think this is nonsense.
Well, I think I was in a booth in a restaurant in Austin, actually, with a friend, and he said, "Wow, this is like the 1 square mile in all of Texas where masks are required." And he actually had not come with one, and I was like, "Oh God, I have so many here. Take one of mine." And we sat down, and because we're in a booth, he said, "Oh, it's not about the smoke. It's actually there's the invisible force field that comes across the booth, and as long as everyone else stays outside of our force field, we have no chance of spreading the thing that we don't have."
Right. The thing that you don't have.
Yeah.
Right. And, the paradoxes are so many, when you have, the waiter comes over wearing a mask, right? And you're sitting there not masked. And actually my sense is, to the extent that this does any good at all, we're more or less morally obligated to put them on at that moment to protect this person, right? It is only because I don't think that this is a very effective remedy that I don't think that this is a glaring error, because it's,
Right. I mean, that's what I was doing until I started to see all of this work suggesting that they're not actually particularly effective.
Yeah. But anyway, yes, a little bat signal that suggests I don't think this policy is all that well thought out is liable to put you in contact with others who have those doubts and are likely feeling very isolated about themselves.
Yeah, and really there's a smugness that some people are willing and eager to convey. And then it's not there's everyone else, But that is one of the ways, that is one of the dichotomies that I am seeing now. There's the smug who largely, are actually functionally innumerate, I think. And get your nose out of my water.
She is not talking to me. For those of you listening to the podcast, she's talking to the cat.
Yeah. And who say things like follow the science, but don't actually, wouldn't recognize a hypothesis if it smacked them in the nose. And then there's sort of everyone else. And yes, there are degrees to which the everyone else have conclusions that they're certain of or not certain of, or have investigated them as much as possible from first principles. But there is a degree of uncertainty. The smug are inherently certain. And if you're certain right now that the thing that got handed you by the CDC or MSNBC or anyone is simply true on account of it got handed to you, then you're not doing your thinking for yourself. And frankly, your smugness should evaporate right away because it's based on nothing good.